Okay, so we have laid the foundations, and now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty and start doing the heavy lifting. This is when we start looking at how the IEP is developed, what has to be included piece by piece. So we're going to start with the PLAF. We're going to go quickly through what led us to this point. So the process. The teacher sees a student is struggling in reading. The teacher implements Tier 1 intervention. Student does not respond to the intervention. So then the teacher refers the student to the SAT team. The SAT recommends more intense interventions, a Tier 2, for 6 to 8 weeks. The student does not respond. The SAT recommends Tier 3 intervention for 4 to 6 weeks. The student still does not respond. So they complete a read. The team determines that more evaluation is necessary. Parental consent is obtained because you have to get consent if you're going to do evaluations. And the student is referred for special education evaluation to evaluate for a suspected learning disability. So the evaluation is completed. The MET completes their evaluations. Remember, there's a timeline for this. And if you remember, it's 30 school days from the time the written consent is completed. The IEP meeting is scheduled. The IEP team looks at the MET decision. The MET team members may have to give explanation if necessary to support their recommendation to the IEP team. The IEP team either agrees or disagrees with the recommendation from the MET. So they either say the student is eligible or not eligible. And remember, there's a couple different tracks. If the student is found not eligible, you can send them back to general education, or the parent or someone can request that they be evaluated for a 504 plan, and that would be another piece of it. So in this instance, we're going to say for our purposes that the IEP team agrees that the student qualifies for special education services and a full IEP has to be developed. So IEPs are the heart of the IDEA. Remember, there is specific information that's required to be included. The completed IEP is the district's plan to offer a free, appropriate public education for the student. So the IEP is being developed for that, and then at the end of that, the plan is presented to the parent and says, this is the district's offer of FAPE. So you have to understand exactly what the IEP is. According to the federal regulations, the definition of an individualized education program, according to 300-320, this is the general statement as used in this part. The term individualized education program, or IEP, means a written statement for each child with a disability that is developed, reviewed, and revised in a meeting in accordance with 300-320 through 300-324, and it must include some other pieces. So the IEP has required parts that must be included, and the first one that we're going to discuss is the PLAF. The present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. It contains information that ranges from broad to specific, and there's all kinds of information that's required to develop a legal IEP and offer a meaningful, free, appropriate public education so that a student can progress and have educational benefit. That's the whole basis for this. Okay? So it's the PLAF statement, and it means present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. So now say this to yourself 3 times real fast. PLAF, PLAF, PLAF. So the PLAF has required elements. A statement of the child's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, including how the child's disability affects the child's involvement and progress in the general education curriculum. So the same curriculum as for non-disabled children, or for preschool children, as appropriate, how the disability affects the child's participation in appropriate activities. So I want to emphasize the statement that says the same curriculum as for non-disabled children. There's a thought that when you speak of curriculum in relation to special education, that there's a separate curriculum. The reason that that misconception is floating around out there is that special education used to teach like whatever they thought was best to teach the child, no matter what level they were. Like they'd just start in and you continue to just work on addition problems forever and ever until they actually got them. If the student was 12 and did not know the name of the colors and the teacher thought that was the important concept for the student to know, then that's what they worked on, regardless of what the other 12-year-old students in general ed were working on. So the special ed students were not taken through the same curriculum and expected to be working on those same standards. In recent years, as the newer model of RTI has been put into place, the Department of Education has been putting initiatives into place to ensure that educators are working from the same curriculum. So in Michigan, just so you understand, there's only one curriculum, the Michigan Merit Curriculum, and the IEP needs to be standards-based. It has to be developed to meet the students' needs while having them move through the same standards as students that are non-disabled. Remember, as you are developing the IEP, you need to have high expectations of all students. So through the PLAF statement, you're going to identify and prioritize the specific needs of the student. You're going to establish baseline levels of performance in relation to the general curriculum in order to develop an individualized and meaningful plan. So you're going to set up where is the student currently functioning and where are they going to go from here. You're going to identify the degree of match between the student's skills and the instructional environment for the purpose of guiding decision making. So the student may be in third grade, but they're only on a first grade level. So you're going to have to work on those pieces with the student. So you're going to have to start where the student is working and work to move them up. So you're going to use information that you've gathered on the student, all of the current evaluations done in the classroom, as well as any that were completed by the MET. You're going to use parent input, any observations, grades, general education input, student assistance team meeting information, results from any interventions that were used and how the student responded. If the student has had a previous IEP, what information is there. And this is where the annual IEP will come into place. You're going to use progress monitoring information done from the previous IEP to determine student need areas. The IEP will review all of the current data and determine the student's need areas like in math, reading, writing, social, and behavioral issues. Once the need areas are decided, the PLAF statement, which is a narrative about the student, is written. As you are developing the PLAF, there are some required elements. So if you look around the circle starting at the top, you're going to have impact on progress, baseline data, can-can't narrative, educational need pieces that are put into place, and functional performance. And all these pieces are required according to the Michigan Department of Ed monitoring standards. It has to contain all 5 of these elements in order to be a compliant PLAF statement, because you're going to have all of these pieces in order to develop the rest of the IEP. So we're starting with the impact statement. So we're starting at the top of that circle and we're going to move our way around clockwise. This statement is important as it sets the stage. Think about how the student's disability will make it difficult for the student to progress in the general ed class. You're answering and defending the decision that in order to progress, the student needs specialized instruction. So why does the student need specialized instruction? So you're going to work on one need at a time. So if the student has a math need and a writing need, You're going to maybe look at math first or writing first. So, a statement of how the disability impacts involvement in general education. Is the relationship clear between the student's disability and how it affects his or her progress in the curriculum? Does the statement give a curriculum referenced picture that helps develop goals and objectives and addresses least restrictive environment? So this is going to be the impact statement, and we're going to work through it. So the information in the impact statement is not limited to academic considerations. It can include functional issues related to behavior, motor activities, speech and language, or any other concern that you have about the student, any need area. It depends on what you're trying to address. So here's some examples, like for socialization. Something that might impact the student is their ability to join a group, to cope with teasing, to work with a group of peers. Under independence, maybe moving around the building or transitioning from class to class, following directions, organization. So if they're having difficulty with these areas, this might be what you want to work on. Academic progress could be accessing the curriculum. Maybe they have a written expression issue. Basic literary skills like their reading skills or math computation. So here's an example. So here's impact on progress, and we're going to use the student Jason. Jason is a student with autism spectrum disorder. His disability adversely impacts his socialization in the general ed setting. So his disability is his autism spectrum disorder, and how is it impacting? It's making it difficult for him to socialize. So he needs specialized instruction to support his need to be able to socialize in the general ed setting. Why is this important? Well, maybe later you have to be able to get along with people in order to get a job and to work, to join a group, and to sometimes function in society. So you have to look at how is it keeping him from progressing in the gen ed curriculum. If he's in a class where you have to do a lot of teamwork activities, that's going to make it difficult for him to do that. So here are some other examples of impact statements. Jason's auditory processing, that's his need area, affects his ability to take notes during lectures. So he's going to have trouble progressing in the classroom because he's going to have difficulty taking notes because he can't process it auditorily. Jason's behavior prevents independent work on general education classroom assignments. So maybe he can't sit in class, or he can't work with a large number of individuals, and he can't sit still, and he verbalizes out. So he can't work independently on his assignments. And so if the teacher says, hey, I'm going to give you time to work, and he can't get his done by the end of class and he gets an F, that's affecting his progress. Jason's poor work analysis and comprehension strategy skills continue to negatively impact his performance on all grade level tasks. So his ability to analyze, like that he's not doing good work, or his comprehension in reading is making it difficult across the board. He's not doing well in any of his classes. Jason's performance is below average in the areas of reading comprehension and spelling, which make it difficult for him to complete assignments. But if you look at the impact statements, remember we're focusing on a need area, not just that he needs special ed. The first one is on his auditory processing. How does his auditory processing need affect him? How does his behavior affect him? How does his poor work analysis and comprehension skills affect him? And then in the last one, how does his reading comprehension and spelling affect him? So you're picking out a specific need area and addressing that. The next element that you must include is baseline data. So that's the second one. Specific baseline data of the student's deficit areas. Does the baseline data quantify the impact of the disabling condition? So does it talk about how his reading comprehension is affecting him in the classroom? Or does it say he's this far behind in class? Is there numeric data? How many days of school did he miss? What are his grades on his tests that he's getting in reading? Can the data be graphed? So can you look at it and go, oh, on his first test he got 30%, on his second test he got this? Can goals easily be written from the data? So can you tell where he's starting and what specific things he needs help on? Does the baseline data relate to progress monitoring of the goal? So if the student already has an IEP and goals are written for him, you're going to be expected as the special ed teacher to progress monitor those, to look at the goal and to determine through assessments and evaluations if the student's progressing. And that's data that you can use to determine whether or not he's making progress or whether or not you need to continue to work in a specific area. But you have to use baseline data. And that's going to set up where is the student currently working. Does the data provide the starting point for each goal that you're going to write in the IEP? And does it set the measurement method that will be used in each goal? So if you're going to say he's on a second grade reading level and you're going to work to get him to a third, does your data support that? Do the reading assessments say he's working on a second grade reading level? And can you cite that information? And does that help set the measurement method? Does it say, doing these specific things, this student may be able to make it to a third grade reading level? Where do you find baseline data to use in your PLAF statement? Well, the evaluation information that was completed by the MET that you have as you're in the IEP, classroom performance that you've seen if the student's been in class and you've observed them, or you have test papers, systematic observation. If you're focused on a specific behavior concern and you're watching the student, how many times does he talk out in class? But it can't just be your idea. It actually has to be, on this date, we sat and watched the student for 30 minutes. He spoke out without raising his hand 17 times. Okay? Progress reports. So any grade reports that have gone through. Progress monitoring assessments. If the student has a prior IEP and his goals have been monitored and the progress has been recorded, you can use that. Checklists. If you have a checklist on the student. Did he hang up his coat today if you're working on self-help skills? Okay? Did he unpack his lunch? And you date those kinds of things. Any criterion reference tests that are given, the MEP test, the SAT test, report cards, student input. You can talk to the student about how they feel they're doing, so that's a little bit helpful. Parent input, what are they seeing at home? What are they seeing, and how have those things been happening? But a related conversation, maybe an email from the parent. Standardized achievement tests, like the ones that the MET team are going to give the students. State and district-wide assessments that happen. Those are the places you're going to get your information, because it can't just be from other teachers talking to you and you hear about it. Here are some other examples. Previous progress report data, frequency observations, performance rates. How many times were they able to add the 10 problems correctly? Any grades? Accuracy rates. If they did 10 problems, did they only get one right? The percent of assignments that they've completed and turned in throughout the week. If they had 10 assignments and only turned in one. Their attendance or tardiness can affect how they're learning, so that's a piece that you may want to include. Number of suspensions if it's a behavioral issue. Preparedness for class. So every day when they come in, do they have their paper? Do they have their pencil? Do they have their books? Did they complete their homework? Number of social interactions. Classroom work samples. If you have a daily rating that you're giving the student because they did these specific things and they got 5 points or 6 points. So those are all places where data can come in, but it's not an opinion. And remember that your data it's extremely important that the PLAF statement be based on current, relevant information about the student that's obtained from a number of sources. So you're not just looking at one thing, and it's current, within the past year. The most recent reevaluations, assessments from state and district-wide tests, input from gen ed and special ed teachers, information from parents, and any independent evaluations. So if the parent takes them out and has them tested, you want that information. but it has to be current and relevant to the student. And you have to use data to make your decisions. Data-driven decision making. Without data, you're just another person with an opinion. Well, I think it would be good if we worked on this piece of it because he seems to need that. Why? Who said? How do you know that? Back it up. So show me the data. You have to be able to back up what you say are the student's needs. The team asks the question, why does the student need specialized instruction? Remember your impact statement? How is his need impacting him in the gen ed curriculum? You have to back that up. The answer has to be backed up with data. You have to make decisions based on data, not just because as the special educator you think that's what should happen. Or if the parent wants a specific support for the student for a need that the team is not seeing, you can go to the data and explain that you can't add in services for a student if there is not a need area, just because the IEP team member thinks it would be good for the student. Once again, it's not based on opinion, it's based on data. So here's an example. Observations at recess indicate that he spontaneously initiates social interaction 0 times during a 15-minute recess period. That's data. He has a need. When you're using data, you need to also explain it so that anyone reading the information will understand it. One of the common things that's written or used is grade level. Educators write 6.3 or 2.4. So you have to establish that this is 6th grade 3rd month or 2nd grade 4th month. And the other piece that needs to be addressed is where the student is currently functioning and what grade they are in. Jason is in the 3rd grade 5th month, but his socialization evaluation shows that he interacts on a 1st grade level. So he has social skills that would be appropriate in 1st grade, but he's in 5th grade, so he's behind and needs some assistance in this area. This helps the reader understand the need of the student. Why is it so important to help him here? So once you've written the impact statement and determined what baseline data you're going to use, you're going to work on the can and can't statements. As the PLAF is the foundation, that's going to be the start of goals and objectives that you may need to write later in the IEP process. The can statements can be written from the baseline data, and then you're going to use these to develop your goals. These give a starting point. What can the student do in reading or math or socialization or behavior? The student may be in the 6th grade reading on a 2nd grade level, but they can do that. So Mike can read and comprehend written material on a 2nd grade level, but he cannot read and comprehend on a 3rd grade level. So that's a basic one. And you're going to be writing, you start with the positive statement telling where the student is. That's your baseline. And you start, and when you write the can't statement, it provides the next step that the student will need to work on. So over here, can't descriptions describe what the student is able to do currently. Describe what the student is unable to do and would be a likely next step in the instructional sequence of the curriculum. So here's an example. When prompted by an adult in a highly structured setting, Jason can repeat a simple greeting. However, he has difficulty greeting peers independently in unstructured settings, like during recess, like lunch, and in the hallway, and he prefers to be alone and avoids interaction with peers. So if he's prompted by somebody in like the classroom when you're having a specific class activity which is structured, he can repeat a simple greeting. So if you say, Jason, say hello to the other person, he'll say hello. But if he's just walking out in the hallway or at lunch, he does not do that on his own. So he can do this, but the next thing that you need to work on is having him give greetings. So that's a can't. He can do this, he can't do this. So the next element is educational need. It's a description of the area that you're going to refer to the area. An academic subject area such as math, reading, social studies, language arts. Can be a functional area, such as self-care, social skills, behavior, adaptive functioning. An area of disability such as speech, language, behavior, or motor functioning. You're going to refer to the area and what the student may need to be successful. So the student may need accommodations and modifications to participate in specific educational settings. They may need additional time, reduced quantity of work, yes/no assessments. Functional supports, transition services. They may need help with self-care, social skills, behavior plans, a work experience. They may need specific programs like a resource room or direct social work, or they may need a CI classroom. They may need supplementary aids and services like a consultation or team behavior plan meetings or visual schedules. And they might need goals and objectives like timelines or given criteria to get things done. So what's the need that they need in order to progress? How's it going to be met? So here's an example of an educational need. Jason needs a structured group setting to learn basic greeting skills and supported opportunities to generalize his new skills in lower structured settings. So that's what he needs in order to be successful. It's kind of a broad statement. You're going to get more specific as you determine whether you're going to have to write goals and objectives to support that, whether he needs transition activities. So you're just going to have to decide later where you're going to address this in the IEP. You're making sure that whoever reads the IEP understands that the student will have some needs in a specific area that are going to need to be supported somehow in the IEP. Here's some more examples. Jason has difficulty in unstructured settings and transitional times of the day. He may need to have more supervision at these times. He may also need to have correct responses modeled for him to practice. These are ideas to be using as specific activities later in the IEP to do accommodations, modifications, goals, and objectives. Jason does not turn in all of his assignments and may need to have a checkup in place, like a system to check him. Jason has difficulty focusing on the task given and may need to sit near the instructor or in an area that has less activity. That doesn't mean that you specifically have to do that. You just have to know that he has difficulty focusing, and somehow you're going to have to support that need somewhere in the IEP. It doesn't have to be with the specifics like he may not sit near the instructor or have less activity. Those are just ideas. The specific thing is that you're saying he has difficulty focusing, and here's what we think he may need to have to be successful. The team may determine later that he needs a different kind of support, but it's been called out in the PLAF statement. Documentation of needs not being addressed. So you may need to document why a need will not be addressed in the IEP if the team has to show they are aware of it, that they considered it but decided it was not a priority. If the IEP team does not mention why it's not working on a particular need, someone could interpret that the team forgot to address that need. So the student may have a number of need areas. They could have academic and behavioral needs. If the student's behavior is interfering to the extent that no academics can be worked on until their behavior is under control, the IEP team would need to address that in the PLAF, that the student had a reading comprehension need, maybe. There could be an impact statement written and supporting baseline data incorporated, and you put in can and can't and the educational needs. Then the team could say, we recognize that the student has a reading comprehension need. However, the student has behavioral issues that make it difficult to address the academic needs. So, until the behavior is addressed, we don't feel that the student will be able to make progress on the goals, etc. When we see the student making progress in the behavior area, we'll review the current IEP and try to address the reading need. But you have to tell why you're not addressing a need. We're aware of it. This is why we're not taking care of it right now. The last element that's in the PLAF is the requirement to address the student's functional performance. Educators seem to have the most difficulty with this element, okay? It's a little murky. So, a statement that addresses the student's current status and progress in relation to their desired post-school outcomes, like their career, self-care, living arrangements, community participation, post-secondary educational goals, employability, endurance, accuracy, and rate. So, how are they going to be as an independent individual living out there? Okay? So their functional performance. This is a transition piece, but it doesn't mean that the student has to be 16 before you add this to the PLAF statement. Functional means evident in the child's daily environment, such as the classroom or community. Supports are used to increase the student's progress in the curriculum, socialization or skill development, and independent functioning. So here's an example. Functional performance for Jason. Jason needs to learn to appropriately initiate social interactions as a functional life skill. And that's a little basic one. So the example is showing you Jason, who as you can see is a younger student. He's having trouble interacting with others. This is going to make it difficult for him to join sports teams, clubs, and those things as he gets older, and will cause him problems when he tries to find employment. So think in terms of needs the student have that will keep them from functioning as independently as possible as they move from grade to grade, and then as they transition maybe from high school to post-high school life. Whatever that is, social aspects, employability, post-secondary education. If the student has a reading disability and they want to become a vet, they're going to need to be able to read on grade level so that they can read those assignments, do those tests, keep up with that kind of work. So the functional performance statement could read something like this. Jason would like to become a vet, but his reading disability, and he's in 3rd grade and reading on a 1.2 level, will make it difficult for him to read assignments necessary to complete his education and graduate and go on to post-secondary school. He's going to need to work to increase his reading level as he continues through school. Here's another one. Mike's inability to deal with authority will make it difficult for him to find employment and live independently. He's going to need to have social work support to make progress in this area. So this is a little bit of an educational need, but also focusing on his independence and how he's going to function later in life. Robin wants to go into the general ed classroom, but she continues to have issues with personal hygiene. This will continue to make it difficult for her to join clubs, organizations, and teams, and in the future affect her employment opportunities. She's going to need to learn self-care skills so that she will be able to achieve her goal of living independently. This statement doesn't have to be related to academics, although it can be. It's looking at how the student's need areas will impact their ability to be as independent as possible. The student may be in a wheelchair. The functional performance statement may say, Jonas is in 2nd grade. Jonas is in a wheelchair and will need to work on independently getting on and off the bus or public transportation, as well as moving from class to class. This will make it possible for Jonas to be scheduled into general ed classes as he progresses into middle school and high school. This skill will also allow him to travel independently in the community. Okay, so this is different than the educational need. The educational need is talking about what he needs to support him in the educational setting to be successful. The functional performance is looking at what skills does he need to help him transition to be an independent adult person as he moves through school and out of school. So you're looking at that maybe future piece, but how is it affecting him now, and what does he need to work on now to get to that piece? So that's functional performance. Okay, so those are the 5 pieces that you have to have. And the PLAF drives the entire IEP. So as you're working on those pieces, your impact statement, including baseline data, can statements, the educational need of the student, what does he need for supports, and the functional performance statement for the student. It's the general, it's like a paragraph, like a summary of the student. You're writing a narrative. That narrative is then going to drive the IEP, and it has to relate to goals and objectives, services, special ed programs and services, and transition services. So as you write it, remember that it's the foundation. Everything is built on the PLAF statement. If there's something written in the PLAF about a need, it has to be addressed somewhere else in the IEP later. If you identify a math need, it has to be supported by either goals and objectives, accommodations and or modifications, transition activities, and programs and services. Doesn't have to be all of them, but it has to be connected to one of them. It can be supported in all of those, but it has to be addressed. It has to connect to something. Think about tying a string to each need that you write in the PLAF statement, and then it's going to have to tie to something that you write later in the IEP as we work through the other pieces. You're going to tie it to at least one other area in the IEP, if not more. It depends on the student's need and whether it just needs to be connected to one other thing or more than one other thing. And we will be talking about that as we continue on with the IEP. This will become clearer as we move through. Remember, as you develop the IEP, you can make adjustments to your draft. If you find that you missed something in supporting a need, you can always go back and revise your PLAF statement or add something in. The bottom line is that you develop your IEP based on data. Everything needs to connect, and the plan should allow the student to progress and get educational benefit. So you may feel a little bit confused right now, and we are breaking down and looking at each part of the IEP, and it can get confusing. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me or post in the discussion board so that your classmates or I can respond. So you may feel a bit like this blank thing, like there's nothing connecting up. The bottom line is, remember, develop your IEP based on data. So the PLAF statement is going to be where you start. Don't worry about the other pieces right now. Focus on your PLAF statement and incorporating the 5 elements that we talked about in the PowerPoint. So remember, any questions, contact me or post them in the discussion board so that your classmates can respond.